Katherine Johnson, the human computer who reached the stars. In the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, nestled amid rolling hills and whispering pine trees, the town of White Sulphur Springs quietly carried on its life in the early 20th century. It was a town divided by race, class, and the traditions of segregation that haunted much of the American South. For most, this meant a life of limitation, of deferred dreams. But for one little black girl born on the 26th of August, 1918, those boundaries would eventually become mere obstacles to overcome. Her name was Creola Katherine Coleman, known to her family simply as Katherine. The youngest of 4 children, she entered a world where the odds were stacked high against her. Her father, Joshua Coleman, was a hard-working man, employed as a janitor at the local Greenbrier Hotel, an upscale resort that black families like his were not permitted to enter except to clean, cook, or carry luggage. Her mother, Joylette, was a teacher, nurturing not only Katherine but also the idea that education was the key to liberation. From an early age, Katherine's family noticed something extraordinary about her. Numbers spoke to her not just as figures on a page, but as living, breathing puzzles that made sense in a world that often didn't. By the age of 5, Katherine had already shown signs of prodigious talent. She would count everything: dishes, steps, stars. She was captivated by symmetry, intrigued by patterns in leaves, intrigued by the orbits of imaginary planets she dreamt up in her mind. A family rooted in faith and learning. The Coleman family valued education above all. Though segregation and poverty loomed large, Joylette insisted that her children would receive the best possible schooling regardless of the color line. Their home was filled with books, hymnals, and a quiet but unshakable belief that intellect was a gift not limited by race or gender. Katherine's father, though quiet and modest, supported his children's dreams with unflinching resolve. When the segregated schools in White Sulphur Springs only went up to 8th grade for black children, Joshua made a bold decision. He moved the family over 120 miles to Institute, West Virginia, during the school year, a town with a high school for black students and home to West Virginia State College. He took a job at the Greenbrier during summers and weekends to support his family, traveling back and forth for years so Katherine could learn. This sacrifice would prove pivotal. It meant that Katherine could graduate from high school at age 14, an astonishing feat, even for a white child, let alone a young black girl in the 1932nd, a college prodigy at 14. Katherine enrolled in West Virginia State College, one of the few institutions in the Jim Crow South that accepted black students. At just 14 years old, she walked among students nearly twice her age. But rather than feel intimidated, she excelled. Her intellect was so dazzling that she caught the attention of several professors, including the esteemed mathematician Dr. William W. Schieffelin Claytor, only the 3rd African American in the U.S. to earn a Ph.D. in mathematics. He took Katherine under his wing, encouraging her to pursue mathematics as a professional career, an unheard-of suggestion for a black woman at the time. "You would make a great research mathematician," he once told her. "I'm going to prepare you for it." Claytor created special advanced mathematics courses just for Katherine, courses that were not part of the regular curriculum. He guided her through analytical geometry, abstract algebra, and the intricate mechanics of celestial navigation. More than that, he gave her the confidence to believe she belonged in the halls of science, even if the world didn't yet agree. In 1937, at the age of 18, Katherine graduated summa cum laude with degrees in mathematics and French. She stood at a precipice, academically gifted, eager, and ambitious. But there were few places in the country that would hire a black female mathematician. So Katherine did what many brilliant black women were forced to do at the time she became a teacher: teaching and early career challenges. In Marion, Virginia, Katherine began her career as a public school teacher for black students. She loved her students, but the reality gnawed at her. Her true calling lay beyond the chalkboard and classroom. She longed to push boundaries, to explore unknown territories, not just on Earth, but in the heavens above. In 1939, another door opened. West Virginia University had just been ordered to integrate its graduate schools, and Katherine was selected as one of the first 3 black students and the only woman to attend. It was a historic step. She enrolled in advanced math courses, determined to go further. But life had other plans. After just 1 year, Katherine left the program to marry her first husband, James Goebel, and start a family. She would go on to have 3 daughters, Joylette, Katherine, and Constance. Though she temporarily stepped back from academia, her hunger for numbers never faded. She continued teaching, always waiting, always searching for an opportunity to use her mind in the way it was meant to be used. That opportunity came in 1952, the call from Langley, NACA needs computers. A relative told Katherine about job openings at Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory in Hampton, Virginia. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, was hiring black women with strong math skills to work as computers, human calculators, who would support aeronautical engineers. Katherine applied immediately and was accepted in 1953. From the moment she walked into Langley, it was clear she was entering a different world. Women, especially black women, were confined to racially segregated office spaces. Katherine was assigned to the West Area Computing Section, a segregated unit of all black female mathematicians. They worked under white supervisors and were excluded from high-level meetings or authorship on technical reports. But Katherine didn't come to Langley to remain invisible. She came to change the way the world navigated the skies. Breaking gravity. Katherine Johnson's early years at NACA. Entering the world of flight, when Katherine Johnson stepped onto the grounds of Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory in 1953, she was not merely starting a new job, she was stepping into a realm where the future was being shaped. NACA, the predecessor to NASA, was engaged in crucial aeronautical research during the Cold War. It was an elite institution filled with white male engineers, mathematicians, and scientists who were attempting to conquer the sky, an arena Katherine had long been mentally exploring. Though hired as a computer, Katherine was no ordinary calculator. Within her first weeks, she displayed an intuitive understanding of numbers, an attention to detail, and a creative ability to solve mathematical problems that impressed even the most seasoned engineers. Despite being placed in the West Area Computing Section, a segregated division for black female mathematicians, Katherine was frequently borrowed by engineers in other units, who quickly realized her capabilities far exceeded the role she had been hired for. She didn't simply compute, she analyzed, she questioned, and she thought like a scientist. The segregated workplace. Langley's culture reflected the reality of Jim Crow America. Black employees used separate bathrooms, ate at separate lunch tables, and were not invited to meetings. Katherine quietly rebelled against these norms. She ignored the colored sign above the restroom and simply used the one nearest to her office. She refused to be limited by a system that sought to devalue her mind because of the color of her skin or her gender. Though few in power acknowledged it at the time, this quiet defiance was the beginning of a broader cultural shift at NACA, one that would become more evident as the space race accelerated. Katherine's ability to communicate with engineers in their own technical language without arrogance, with clarity, set her apart. She began working on the Flight Research Division, focusing on calculating flight trajectories, aircraft speed, turbulence, and more. Her work, though behind the scenes, was instrumental in many of the early aviation breakthroughs. But it was not enough to simply do the work. Katherine wanted to know why the work was done and how it would be used. She began attending meetings where only men were allowed. When she was questioned about her presence, she famously responded, "Is there a law against it?" No one could name one, and so she stayed. Precision in an era before digital calculators. In the 1952nd, even the smallest miscalculation could mean catastrophic consequences for a test pilot or experimental flight. Computers, both human and mechanical, had to be flawless. Katherine's calculations helped guide test pilots through the complexities of transonic and supersonic flight. She was often the last line of defense against mathematical error. Engineers came to trust her with their most critical problem. Her work was exacting. She often spent hours recalculating equations by hand, using nothing more than a pencil, a slide rule, and her deep understanding of analytical geometry. Her attention to detail bordered on obsessive, but it was this very precision that earned her a permanent place in the engineering section. It was a rare position for any woman, let alone a black woman. Family, faith, and fortitude. While Katherine's professional life was ascending, her personal life was marked by both joy and struggle. Her husband, James Goebel, had been diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. As his health declined, Katherine became the sole provider for their 3 daughters, working full-time while caring for him at home. Despite this, she never missed a day of work. Her colleagues were often unaware of the full extent of her personal burden. Katherine did not complain. Instead, she found strength in her faith, her children, and her unwavering belief in the power of knowledge. James passed away in 1956. Katherine was devastated, but she did not falter. She poured herself into her work with renewed focus, determined to build a future for her daughters and to honor her husband's memory by continuing to rise. A mathematical leap into the space race. By the late 1952nd, the world had changed. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, stunning the United States and sparking a new chapter in human history. The space race. America scrambled to catch up. NACA transformed into NASA in 1958, and with that change came a monumental shift in mission, from aircraft to spacecraft. Katherine was right where she needed to be. She began working with the Space Task Group, the elite team responsible for planning the first manned spaceflights. Her job was not just to calculate trajectories, it was to ensure that every launch, every orbit, every re-entry was mathematically sound. One error could mean death. One misstep could mean international humiliation. But Katherine thrived under pressure, becoming indispensable. Though NASA had now absorbed NACA, the old culture of exclusion still lingered. Very few women were part of the core planning teams, and fewer still were black. But Katherine's brilliance could not be denied. She became one of the few computers whose name was known by engineers throughout the agency. Her work soon involved calculating the trajectory for America's first human spaceflight, Alan Shepard's Freedom 7 mission in 1961. Katherine's equations helped ensure Shepard's safe return, a pivotal moment in American space history. But it was her work on John Glenn's orbital flight in 1962 that would etch her name into history. Before launching aboard Friendship 7, John Glenn insisted that Katherine verify the coordinates calculated by the new IBM computers. Despite being state-of-the-art, the machines were still fallible, and Glenn wanted human assurance. "Get the girl to check the numbers," Glenn said. "If she says they're good, I'm ready to go." Katherine checked, the numbers were good, and Glenn flew into orbit. Quiet excellence, loud legacy. Katherine Johnson never sought fame. She never asked for credit. Yet her name would become a beacon for generations to come, though that recognition would take decades. In those early years, she simply went to work, day after day, calculating the mathematics of the universe and pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible for a woman, for a Black American, for anyone. Her presence at NASA changed more than just flight paths. It began to change the culture of science itself. The orbital pioneer, Katherine Johnson, and the Mercury missions. A nation on edge? A mathematician in command? The early 1962nd were a time of incredible tension, not just in the United States, but across the globe. The Cold War was escalating, and the competition between the U.S. and the Soviet Union to conquer space had reached fever pitch. When Yuri Gagarin completed a full orbit around Earth in 1961, the Soviet Union had officially taken the lead in space exploration. The pressure on NASA was immense. The U.S. needed to respond quickly and boldly. Behind the scenes, Katherine Johnson was working tirelessly to make that response possible. She was now part of NASA's Space Task Group, and her mathematical precision had become indispensable. The group's new focus, Project Mercury. The objective, to send an American astronaut into Earth's orbit and return him safely. The stakes, nothing less than national pride and the reputation of American science. Calculating the impossible, Project Mercury was the United States' first human spaceflight program, and it was plagued with challenges. Computing trajectories for orbital flight was a level above anything Katherine had done before. It required accounting for Earth's rotation, the spacecraft's velocity, the changing pull of gravity at different altitudes, and the desired re-entry point. These weren't simple equations. They were complex systems involving time, speed, and the brutal unpredictability of nature. Katherine didn't flinch. Working alongside engineers like Chris Kraft and Ted Skopinski, Katherine helped develop the trajectory analysis for Mercury Atlas 6, the historic mission that would carry astronaut John Glenn into orbit. But even as NASA was investing in digital computers to speed up calculations, there remained doubts about the machine's reliability. That's where Katherine's human precision became essential. Before launch, the orbital equations were fed into the IBM computers. But Glenn had one final demand. He wanted the girl, Katherine Johnson, to run the numbers by hand. "If she says they're right, then I'll go," he declared. This wasn't a throwaway comment. Glenn was putting his life in Katherine's hands. She recalculated the entire trajectory manually, with a pencil, paper, and her mind. Her verification matched the computer's output, and Glenn launched into space on the 20th of February, 1962, becoming the first American to orbit Earth. The flight lasted 4 hours and 55 minutes. Katherine's math brought him back safely. The legacy of Friendship 7. Friendship 7's success was more than a technical milestone. It was a political and cultural moment that reaffirmed America's commitment to space exploration. But it was also a quiet triumph for Katherine. Though her name would not appear in headlines at the time, everyone in the Flight Research Division knew Katherine Johnson had made the mission possible. For many years, her contributions were buried in reports, labeled simply under computer. She was not given interviews, she was not invited to give speeches, and yet she was changing history. Her role was crucial in redefining what was possible, not just in the skies above, but in the halls of NASA itself. Mentoring a new generation. Katherine understood the importance of her presence at NASA. As one of the few black women in a position of technical authority, she became an unintentional mentor to others who would follow. She encouraged young women, particularly black girls, to pursue mathematics and science. She spoke to students, visited classrooms, and told them, "Don't be afraid of numbers. Don't be afraid to be smart." She had walked the path before them alone, unsupported, and sometimes invisible. But she blazed it nonetheless. Her career showed that excellence could break through any ceiling, even those made of reinforced steel. Advancing America's reach. After the success of Glenn's flight, Katherine continued to work on many aspects of the Mercury program, contributing to calculations that guided other astronauts and spacecraft back to Earth. She worked on launch windows and re-entry angles, orbital rendezvous necessary for docking in space, recovery zones in the ocean. Each calculation required perfection. There was no room for approximation. A single error in math could mean an astronaut's death or a spacecraft lost in the abyss of space. Katherine's numbers were never wrong. A world still changing. While Katherine was proving her worth to NASA every day, the country around her was undergoing seismic shifts. The civil rights movement was challenging the very structures that had once held her back. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his I Have a Dream speech. A year later, the Civil Rights Act was signed into law. Katherine watched history unfold, aware that her own quiet work inside NASA's walls was a part of that same struggle. Though she wasn't marching on the front lines, she was advancing the movement in another way, with science, with persistence, and with excellence that demanded recognition. She was proof that black minds not only belonged in science, they were essential to it. Toward the moon, Katherine Johnson and the Apollo program. NASA's new frontier. As the 1,962nd progressed, NASA's mission became bolder, riskier, and far more ambitious. No longer was it enough to orbit Earth. The target had shifted to something previously unthinkable, landing a man on the moon. President John F. Kennedy's bold proclamation in 1961, "We choose to go to the moon," had galvanized the nation. But the dream demanded a new level of precision, planning, and bravery. It would require launching astronauts over 238,000 miles into space, inserting them into lunar orbit, landing them on the moon's surface, then returning them safely to Earth. Behind every maneuver, orbit, and landing angle was an army of minds calculating the unknown, and Katherine Johnson was at the heart of that army. Trajectory into history. By the mid-1962nd, Katherine was working closely with engineers on the Apollo program, the largest and most complex space project in history. One of her most vital contributions came in calculating the trajectory for the Apollo 11 mission, the historic flight that would take Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins to the moon in July 1969. Her work focused on the return trajectory, the math required to get the astronauts back from the moon to Earth. This wasn't just complicated, it was life or death. If even one variable was off mass, velocity, gravitational pull, the astronauts could miss Earth entirely or burn up on re-entry. Katherine's equations helped solve the complex conundrum of when and where to ignite the lunar module's engines for the return journey. The margin for error was minuscule, the pressure was monumental, but her calculations were perfect. When Apollo 11 launched and the lunar module landed on the Sea of Tranquility, the world celebrated a giant leap for mankind. When Armstrong and Aldrin returned safely, it was also a quiet triumph for a woman whose name still remained largely unknown to the public, the unsung architect. Despite the success of Apollo, Katherine Johnson did not appear in the press conferences. Her name was not included in public briefings. Like so many women of her era, especially women of color, her achievements were buried behind the facade of a male-dominated success story. But her colleagues knew, the engineers knew, the astronauts knew, and eventually the world would know too. Katherine's calm authority, her command of orbital mechanics, and her unwavering commitment to mathematical accuracy made her a key pillar of the Apollo program. Without her work, the dream of walking on the moon might have remained a fantasy. Mathematics, as mission control, to understand the depth of Katherine's work, one must grasp the staggering complexity of Apollo's demands. She had to account for the Earth's gravitational field, the moon's gravitational pull, the rotation and revolution of both celestial bodies, the physics of rocket propulsion, the dangers of radiation belts, solar storms, and micrometeoroids. All of this had to be computed by hand, double-checked, then translated into flight plans that astronauts could execute with their onboard systems. In an age before computer simulations and instant error correction, Katherine was the simulator. Her mind was the model. She transformed numbers into pathways across space. A nation divided, a woman united, While Katherine worked to send astronauts to the moon, America itself was deeply fractured. Protests erupted across the country against the Vietnam War, against racism, against sexism, and against inequality. NASA, too, was facing criticism. Billions were being spent to reach the moon, while communities on Earth remained in poverty and unrest. Katherine understood these tensions. She never dismissed the pain of inequality. But she also believed that science could uplift humanity, that space exploration had the power to unify, to inspire, to prove what humans could achieve when guided by intellect rather than hate. She saw her role not just as a mathematician, but as a bridge, a symbol that progress in space could mirror progress on Earth. Her very presence at NASA was proof that justice was possible. Legacy written in lunar dust. When Apollo 11 touched down on the moon in 1969, and Armstrong uttered the words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," the whole planet exhaled. But few knew that a woman born in segregated West Virginia, who once walked miles to attend a black high school, had helped plot the very course of that leap. Katherine Johnson had turned the impossible into the inevitable. Her math had guided spacecraft across voids of nothingness, from Earth's surface to the lunar plains and back again. And though she remained largely unrecognized in public, within NASA, she was now legendary. Beyond Apollo, Skylab, Shuttle, and a woman's enduring genius, the moon wasn't the end. As the dust of Apollo 11 settled, many believed NASA had reached its zenith. But for Katherine Johnson, the work continued because the future was still wide open. Though America had successfully landed men on the moon, NASA faced a new challenge, maintaining relevance and momentum in a world shifting its priorities. Public interest in space exploration began to wane. Budgets were cut, missions were postponed or canceled. But Katherine didn't stop. She turned her attention to Skylab, America's first space station. Though not as headline-grabbing as lunar landings, the success of Skylab was essential for future long-term space missions. Katherine contributed to calculations for rendezvous and docking procedures, complex maneuvers that would allow spacecraft to connect with the orbital lab. Once again, she proved indispensable. Her mind adapted seamlessly to the evolving needs of spaceflight. She wasn't just solving equations anymore, she was helping invent the very math needed for a new kind of space program. Transitioning into the Space Shuttle era, by the late 1972, NASA was preparing for a new era, the Space Shuttle program. This reusable spacecraft would revolutionize the way America sent humans and cargo into orbit. It required a complete rethinking of launch and re-entry trajectories, landing gear tolerances, vehicle stress models, and orbital decay patterns. Once again, Katherine's brilliance was called upon. She helped analyze orbital mechanics for shuttle flights and contributed to the preliminary groundwork that made flights like Columbia's maiden voyage in 1981 possible. Her focus during these years wasn't just solving equations, it was mentoring, advising, and building the frameworks that younger engineers and mathematicians would use for decades. A mathematician becomes a mentor. By this point, Katherine Johnson had become a quiet legend within NASA's walls. Younger mathematicians and scientists, many of them women and minorities, looked up to her as a symbol of possibility, and she never turned them away. She offered advice, shared her methods, and insisted on rigor and discipline. Katherine believed math should be beautiful, clear, and logical, but also taught with warmth and humility. "You are no better than your numbers," she often said, "but the numbers will always speak the truth." She was not only a trailblazer in computation, but also a torchbearer for generations of rising STEM professionals. Retiring but not retreating. Katherine Johnson officially retired from NASA in 1986 after 33 years of groundbreaking service. By then, her legacy was firmly rooted in the foundations of American space exploration, from Shepard to Glenn, from Apollo to Skylab to the shuttle. But retirement did not mean silence. She continued to give lectures, appear at schools, and mentor students. She told young girls, especially black girls, that they belonged in science. That math was theirs to master. That intellect had no gender or color. She traveled the country, speaking about perseverance, faith, and the power of education. She never forgot the path she had walked, and she made sure others would not have to walk it alone. Recognition, long overdue. It wasn't until the 1992nd and early 2002nd that the world outside NASA began to take real notice of Katherine Johnson's story. Scholars, journalists, and historians began uncovering the names of the hidden figures behind America's space success. Books were written, documentaries were filmed, and in 2015, at the age of 97, Katherine Johnson received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States, from President Barack Obama. The man who had himself shattered racial barriers stood before her and said, "Katherine G. Johnson refused to be limited by society's expectations of her gender and race while expanding the boundaries of humanity's reach." It was a moment of justice, but more importantly, it was a moment of clarity for a world that had finally learned her name. Hidden No More, A Cultural Awakening and the Hidden Figures Revolution, rediscovering the forgotten pioneers. For decades, the names of NASA's black women mathematicians were hidden in footnotes, if mentioned at all. But the tides of history began to change in the early 21st century. In 2016, author Margot Lee Shetterly published Hidden Figures, The American Dream, and the Untold Story of the Black Women Who Helped Win the Space Race. The book chronicled the lives and contributions of Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, three brilliant African-American women whose math made the space age possible. The book was a bestseller, but more than that, it was a revelation. Readers across the world were stunned to learn that NASA's most groundbreaking moments had depended on the calculations of women they had never heard of, and at the heart of that story was Katherine Johnson. For the first time, millions saw her not as a footnote, but as a central figure in the American space saga. From page to screen. Later that same year, Hidden Figures became a major Hollywood film starring Taraji P. Henson as Katherine Johnson. The movie, directed by Theodore Melfi, brought her story to a global audience. Viewers watched as Katherine defied segregation at NASA, marched through a rainstorm to use the colored bathroom, stood her ground in a sea of white male engineers, and calculated the trajectory that would take John Glenn into orbit. While some details were dramatized, the film's spirit was authentic. It captured the quiet revolution that Katherine and her colleagues embodied not by shouting, but by solving. The film was nominated for 3 Academy Awards and became a cultural touchstone. Suddenly, young girls, especially girls of color, were seeing themselves in scientists. Schools created STEM programs inspired by Katherine. Statues were erected. Scholarships were funded. The world had finally opened its eyes. Meeting the world as a living legend, as Hidden Figures gained popularity, Katherine Johnson then, in her late 92nd, was thrust into the global spotlight. She made public appearances, gave interviews, and attended film screenings. Ever humble, she often responded to praise with a gentle smile and her trademark phrase, "I was just doing my job." But the world knew better. They saw her now for what she truly was, a hero in plain clothes. In 2017, NASA named a new building in her honor, the Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Facility at Langley Research Center. It was the first time a NASA facility bore the name of a black woman. In 2018, Mattel introduced a Katherine Johnson Barbie doll as part of its Inspiring Women series. In 2019, a satellite launched by Northrop Grumman was named the SS Katherine Johnson, carrying her name into the stars. The power of representation? What made the recognition so meaningful was not just the honor itself, but what it meant to the world. For years, girls of color had looked into history books and seen only a handful of scientists who looked like them. Katherine Johnson shattered that narrative. She became more than a mathematician. She became a symbol of intelligence, of perseverance, of justice, of what happens when talent meets opportunity, even in the face of overwhelming bias. Her story reminded the world that science is not reserved for the privileged. It is built by all who dare to calculate the future. Katherine's life became a rallying cry. You belong in science. You belong in space. You belong where the numbers are. A mind for the universe. Katherine's thinking, teaching, and timeless influence. Thinking in truth and logic. Katherine Johnson was not just a brilliant mathematician, she was a thinker of rare clarity. Her mind didn't merely calculate, it comprehended. Her work wasn't about punching numbers into formulas, it was about understanding the truth behind motion, orbit, and gravity. At the heart of Katherine's genius was her ability to see mathematics as a language of the universe. For her, every equation was a sentence, every solution a message from the cosmos. Where others saw chaos in complex data, she saw patterns. She once said, "The numbers are the same for everybody. They don't change. You have to learn how to read them." She approached problems with quiet intensity, relying on first principles. If a solution didn't make sense from the ground up, she would rebuild it, not because someone told her to, but because truth demanded it. Teaching as a way of life. Even before she was hired by NASA, Katherine Johnson saw herself as a teacher. She had once taught in segregated public schools, pouring her energy into shaping the next generation of minds. That spirit never left her. Whether mentoring interns at Langley or giving talks at schools, Katherine believed that knowledge had to be shared to be meaningful. She never hoarded her insights. She empowered others to discover their own. She especially believed in lifting up young women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. She told them, "Girls are capable of doing everything men are capable of doing. Sometimes they have more imagination than men." Her passion for education extended beyond the classroom. She co-wrote math textbooks for elementary and high school students, ensuring that even the youngest learners had access to clear, engaging mathematical instruction. For her, education was the first step toward liberation. A voice for justice without shouting. Katherine Johnson never led protests or made angry speeches, but her life itself was a protest against exclusion. She walked through segregated gates. She sat at tables where black women were not welcome. She entered meetings where her very presence changed history just by being there. She believed deeply in equality, but she didn't believe in bitterness. Instead, she used excellence as her tool. Every correct calculation, every flawless trajectory, every calmly stated correction to an engineer was a blow against discrimination. She proved again and again that brilliance knows no race, no gender, and she did it all without raising her voice. The mathematician as philosopher. In her later years, Katherine often reflected on the meaning of her life's work. To her, space wasn't just a destination, it was a metaphor. It represented possibility. If humans could reach the moon, then surely they could reach across lines of race and class. If gravity could be calculated and mastered, then perhaps prejudice could be overcome too. She saw science as a moral endeavor. It required honesty, humility, and courage. Her career was filled with such moments, times when she admitted uncertainty, asked new questions, and pursued answers with grace and rigor. She embodied the spirit of inquiry, not just in equations, but in life. Why Katherine Johnson still matters. Katherine Johnson passed away in 2020 at the age of 101, but her legacy endures not only in museums and memorials, but in the mindset she left behind. In every girl who opens a coding book, in every black student who walks into a physics lecture, in every immigrant child who dreams of touching the stars. She showed us that math is not just about numbers, it's about courage, curiosity, dignity. Her life reminds us that some revolutions happen not in the streets but in silent rooms where a woman with a pencil rewrites the future. A legacy in orbit, honoring Katherine Johnson across generations. More than a name, a lasting impact. By the time of her passing in 2020, Katherine Johnson had become more than a historical figure, she had become an icon. Across schools, universities, tech companies, and government agencies, her name stood for something powerful, the belief that brilliance knows no boundaries. Buildings, awards, and even spacecraft now bore her name, but her greatest monument was in the minds of those she inspired. Her legacy extended far beyond NASA. Katherine Johnson became a symbol for women in STEM, a beacon for racial equity in education, and a story of what persistence and passion can achieve against all odds. Educational programs and scholarships. Following the success of Hidden Figures and the growing recognition of Katherine's achievements, a wave of STEM programs and scholarships were established in her honor. Organizations such as the National Society of Black Engineers, NSBE, Mathematics Association of America, and even private aerospace firms created grants and mentorship initiatives with her name attached. These programs focused on supporting African American girls pursuing mathematics and physics, first-generation college students in STEM, students in underfunded rural and inner-city schools. One of the most impactful was the Katherine G. Johnson Fellowship, awarded annually to underrepresented students excelling in aerospace and mathematical sciences. In every case, the message was clear. You belong here just like she did. NASA's enduring tribute. NASA did more than honor Katherine with buildings and titles. They embraced her story into their organizational identity. The agency integrated Hidden Figures into its official education and outreach materials. Astronauts spoke openly about her legacy. Engineering modules were renamed in her memory. In 2021, NASA celebrated the launch of the SS Katherine Johnson, a cargo spacecraft heading to the International Space Station. It was a poetic full circle. An African-American woman who once calculated return trajectories for Apollo now had her name written on a vessel navigating low Earth orbit. One flight controller remarked, "Her math carried us to the moon. Her name now carries us into the future." Cultural imprints and global influence. Katherine Johnson's legacy transcended aerospace. Her name began appearing in literature, music, classroom curriculums, and fashion. Google honored her with a doodle on her birthday. Time magazine listed her among the 100 most influential people of the 20th century. A school in her home state of West Virginia was renamed the Katherine Johnson Middle School. Statues of her were installed at museums across the U.S., including the Virginia Air and Space Center. Internationally, she inspired similar movements to uncover and celebrate hidden scientific figures, especially women and minorities in science, who had long been left out of the spotlight. Her story ignited a global reckoning with how we define genius and who we choose to remember. In the hearts of dreamers, perhaps Katherine Johnson's most powerful legacy lies in the lives she quietly changed. The girl in Detroit who solved the quadratic equation because she saw Katherine do it on screen, the young black boy in Georgia who wrote an essay about Katherine for his scholarship application, the woman in India who, after watching Hidden Figures, applied for a job at the National Space Agency. Katherine Johnson didn't just rewrite trajectories in space, she rerouted lives on Earth. Her legacy orbits us all. The final equation, remembering a life fully calculated, the peaceful departure of a legend. On the 24th of February, 2020, Katherine Johnson passed away at the age of 101. The announcement was met with a wave of tributes from scientists, politicians, educators, astronauts, artists, and world leaders. Her death marked not just the end of a personal journey, it marked the conclusion of a chapter in the history of American science, civil rights, and human spaceflight. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said it best, "NASA will never forget Katherine Johnson's courage and the milestones we could not have reached without her." President Barack Obama had already honored her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015, but after her death, her story was told again with deeper reverence. Networks paused regular programming to run segments about her. Schools held memorials. Social media trended with her quotes. It was a global mourning not just for her death, but for the light she represented. Reflections from her family. Katherine was a wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Her family remembered her as kind, loving, deeply spiritual, and endlessly curious. She often played math games with her grandchildren and reminded them that there's always something else to learn. She believed in faith, discipline, and education, but never pushed others. She led by example, trusting that curiosity, once sparked, would grow on its own. Her daughters remembered how she cooked dinner after long days at NASA and still had time to check homework and read bedtime stories. She made history before breakfast, one of them once joked, and folded laundry after. Her home life was no less remarkable than her public achievements. She embodied balance between intellect and humility, ambition and grace. The final equation, her philosophy of life. In her later years, Katherine often reflected on the lessons life had taught her. She believed in order, reason, and purpose. Her life mirrored the precision of her work, measured, composed, and filled with intention. She once said, "I like to learn. That's an art and a science in itself." To Katherine, life was a problem to be solved with kindness and effort. She saw challenges not as roadblocks, but as invitations to rise. She saw injustice as a system built on ignorance and education as the antidote. Her approach to racism and sexism was not fueled by anger, but by determination. Prove them wrong, she often advised, and then go further. A century well spent. Few people in history lived to see their impact resonate across generations. Katherine Johnson did. She watched humans land on the moon, thanks in part to her equations. She lived to see a black president award her the nation's highest civilian honor. She witnessed herself become a symbol of hope, strength, and possibility for millions. She celebrated her 100th birthday, surrounded by family, friends, and admirers from around the world. At that event, she wore her trademark pearls, smiled, and simply said, "I'm just glad I could help." That was her essence, humble, brilliant, and gracious to the very end. The equation that changed the world. Katherine Johnson's name will live wherever humans dare to aim higher. She did more than compute numbers, she calculated possibility. Her life was not defined by the color of her skin or the prejudices of her time. It was defined by the clarity of her mind and the power of her will. The final equation of Katherine Johnson's life was not found in a notebook or on a blackboard. It was written in the lives she changed, the doors she opened, and the stars she helped us reach. Katherine Johnson's 101-year timeline, a journey in milestones. Early years, 1918-1937. The 26th of August, 1918. Katherine Coleman is born in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, to Joshua and Joylette Coleman. 1926. Skips several grades due to extraordinary aptitude in math. 1928. At just 10 years old, Katherine begins high school at the Institute at West Virginia State College. 1933. Enrolls at West Virginia State College at age 15. 1937. Graduates summa cum laude with degrees in mathematics and French. Her mentor is the renowned black mathematician Dr. W. W. Schieffelin Claytor, 1939. Marries James Goebel and becomes one of the first African-American women to integrate West Virginia University's graduate math program, 1939-1952. Works as a math teacher and focuses on raising her 3 daughters even as her husband's health declines. Despite family responsibilities, she remains intellectually active, studying research papers and following developments in mathematics. 1953. Applies for a position at NACA, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, at Langley and is hired. Assigned to the West Area Computing Section, a segregated unit of African American female mathematicians. Soon stands out for her insight, confidence, and questions that transcend gender and race boundaries. 1958. Becomes one of the first black women to be transitioned into the newly formed NASA after NACA's reorganization. 1960. Co-authors her first NASA report, making her one of the first women to receive authorship credit in the Flight Research Division. 1961. Calculates trajectory analysis for Alan Shepard, the first American in space. 1962. Tasked with verifying orbital equations for John Glenn's historic mission. He famously requests, "Get the girl to check the numbers." 1966. Publishes technical work on rendezvous paths supporting the future Gemini missions. Works on backup procedures and trajectory computations for the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969. Contributes to Apollo 13's safe return by helping devise emergency reentry calculations after an onboard explosion. Receives increasing internal recognition for her precision and leadership, though largely uncredited publicly at the time. Continues to work on the Space Shuttle program and Earth Resources satellite projects. Co-authors 26 technical papers during her NASA career. 1986. Retires after 33 years of service. After retirement, she becomes active in educational outreach, encouraging women and minorities to enter STEM. 1997-2006. Honored by various universities and professional groups. 2015. Receives the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama. 2016. Portrayed by Taraji P. Henson in the Oscar-nominated film Hidden Figures. 2017. NASA names the Katherine G. Johnson Computational Research Facility in her honor. 2018. Turns 100, celebrated across NASA and the STEM community. 2020, the 24th of February. Passes away at 101, leaving a legacy etched in both history and science. Katherine's life timeline reflects not just a series of events, but a relentless pursuit of precision, equity, and purpose. Each milestone was a step towards something greater, not just for herself, but for every woman, every black child, every dreamer who thought science wasn't for them. She turned barriers into equations. She turned equations into history. Letters to Katherine, tributes from the world she changed. From a young girl in Nigeria, dear Miss Katherine Johnson. My name is Amara, and I am 12 years old. I live in Lagos, Nigeria. I saw the movie Hidden Figures last year and asked my teacher how you could do all that math in your head. She said it was because you believed in yourself and worked hard. Now I want to be a space engineer. I write math equations on my bedroom wall with chalk. My brothers laugh at me sometimes, but I don't stop. I tell them, if Katherine could do it, so can I. Thank you for showing me that girls can be smart, strong, and silent heroes. With love, Amara. From an aerospace engineer at NASA, Miss Johnson, I work in orbital mechanics today because of you. I am a Latina engineer from Houston, Texas. When I joined NASA's internship program, I walked past a portrait of you every day. I used to think I had to shout or fight to be noticed in this field, but you taught me something different. You taught me the power of precision, the quiet power of being right. I still have your photo on my desk. When I get stuck, I look at it. You remind me that my voice matters even when no one's listening. Thank you. Elena Morales, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. From a middle school principal in Chicago, Katherine, you don't know me, but I've spoken your name 1,000 times. I am a middle school principal in one of the roughest neighborhoods in Chicago. Our school is 90% black, and many students come from broken homes. But when we start our unit on Heroes of Science, their eyes light up when we talk about you. You changed how they see math. More importantly, you changed how they see themselves. In your honor, we've renamed our STEM lab the Katherine Johnson Discovery Room. Keep watching over these children. They're walking the path you cleared. Principal Shonda Bell, Southside Academy. From a former Hidden Figure colleague. Katherine, we sat side by side for 5 years in the West Computing Wing. I remember how you refused to let the signs on the door define you. I was always too shy to ask questions in those engineering meetings. But you'd raise your hand and say, "Why don't we double-check that?" You weren't just smarter, you were braver. After you moved to flight research, I missed you terribly. I wanted to tell you then, you gave me courage. I'm 94 now, and I tell my grandkids, I knew Katherine Johnson, she made rockets fly, and people believe. With admiration, Dorothy James, retired NASA mathematician, from a teen girl in Kentucky. Hi, Miss Katherine. I'm 16 and applying for college. I wrote my personal statement about you. My counselor said I should write about someone who moved the world forward. I said, then I'll write about Katherine Johnson. My dad left when I was 8. My mom works 2 jobs. Sometimes I feel like nobody expects anything from me. But when I read about you checking John Glenn's numbers, I thought, maybe I'm not nobody. Maybe I can matter. Thank you for showing me that greatness can be soft and heroes can wear glasses. Love, Danielle, Katherine's answer to the world. Though Katherine is no longer here to respond, we imagine her reply would be simple. Thank you for remembering. Keep learning. Keep asking. Keep flying. These letters, real or imagined, are more than tributes. They are echoes of Katherine's legacy, proof that her life continues to ripple through time, guiding hands, opening doors, lifting heads. She changed history, not just by where she went, but by who she let follow her. The mathematics of belief, why Katherine Johnson still matters. The power of representation. Representation isn't just a buzzword, it's validation. When a young girl sees someone who looks like her solving spaceflight trajectories or receiving a presidential medal, it rewires something inside her. It whispers, "You belong, you are possible." Before Katherine Johnson, many black children never saw themselves in science textbooks. They rarely read about scientists who were women, and almost never saw both identities together. Katherine shattered that void not by force, but by existence. She showed that representation isn't about being famous, it's about being present where history is written. The blueprint for quiet bravery. Katherine wasn't loud, she wasn't confrontational, she never marched, and she wasn't arrested for civil disobedience. But she was brave. Brave enough to walk into segregated offices and demand a seat at the desk. Brave enough to ask questions in all-white engineering meetings. Brave enough to prove that excellence cannot be denied forever. Her life teaches us that resistance can be precise. That quiet competence, when consistent and undeniable, is its own form of protest. STEM's cultural revolution. Katherine's legacy has ignited a cultural transformation in STEM. In the last decade alone, black women have entered engineering programs in record numbers. The number of female aerospace graduates has doubled since the release of Hidden Figures. Coding boot camps and physics programs now use her story as required reading. Tech companies and research labs are reevaluating their recruitment pipelines to be more inclusive. She is no longer a hidden figure, she is a foundation. A generation of scientists is now building rockets and algorithms on the shoulders of a woman who once had to walk to a separate bathroom to do her job. Why Katherine still matters today. Katherine Johnson matters today more than ever because we still live in a world that questions the value of equity, intellect, and humility. Her story is a reminder that math is not neutral. It's human, it's political, it's used to determine whose voice counts. Genius needs access. You cannot change the world if you are never allowed in the room. History is incomplete. Unless we search for the hidden figures, we are only telling half the story. Her equations may have guided spacecraft, but her legacy recalibrates our moral compass. The equation of impact. If we could write Katherine Johnson's life as a mathematical formula, it might look like this. Curiosity champs education, champs opportunity, champs resilience, transformation. Each variable in that equation is something we can nurture in others. We can spark curiosity in classrooms. We can protect education as a right. We can fight to expand opportunity. We can teach resilience by sharing her story. And if we do that, we don't just honor Katherine, we become part of the equation. Katherine Johnson matters not just because of what she did, but because of what she made possible. She didn't just reach for the stars. She gave us the math to reach them too. Beyond the horizon, the future she helped build. The ripple effect in space exploration. Katherine Johnson's legacy continues to propel humanity further into the cosmos. Every major NASA mission today builds on the mathematical principles she refined. Her early work on orbital mechanics, launch windows, and trajectory calculations laid the groundwork for the Space Shuttle program, the International Space Station, the James Webb Space Telescope, the Artemis program to return to the Moon, future missions to Mars and beyond. Her contributions were not fleeting, they were foundational. Every launch countdown echoes her legacy. Inspiring future scientists and innovators, Katherine didn't invent math, but she made it aspirational. Her life inspires countless organizations and initiatives that empower underrepresented groups in STEM, including Black Girls Code, NASA's Minority University Research and Education Project, MUIR, Girls Who Code, STEMinist Movement, Hidden Genius Project. In schools across the world, classrooms bear her name. Scholarships, computer labs, and space camps now exist in her honor. Her story is used in diversity training, not just in NASA, but in Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and government agencies. She is a North Star for those lost in systemic barriers. Cultural and educational impact. Since the release of Hidden Figures, film, and book, Katherine Johnson's story has become an educational staple. It's taught in AP U.S. History, Algebra and Calculus classes, African American Studies programs, Women's Studies, Aerospace Engineering courses. The story humanizes science. It reminds students that behind every number is a name, a soul, a struggle. It's no longer unusual for young students to say, "I want to be like Katherine Johnson." And that's perhaps her greatest contribution, normalizing brilliance in spaces where it was once forbidden. Her name among the stars. In 2021, NASA named its Northrop Grumman Cygnus spacecraft after her, the SS Katherine Johnson. It delivered cargo to the International Space Station, symbolically carrying her legacy into orbit. The naming wasn't just ceremonial, it was cosmic justice. From a girl barred from libraries in segregated Virginia to a woman whose name now sails through space. Her story represents what happens when brilliance refuses to bow to injustice, a future rooted in her legacy. As AI, quantum computing, and interplanetary travel shape the next 100 years, Katherine Johnson's legacy reminds us of the human heart of science. It tells us to measure twice, not just in calculations, but in character. To elevate the overlooked, not out of charity, but out of necessity. To build bridges between communities, disciplines, and generations. In the future, we may reach other planets. We may build lunar colonies or unlock the fabric of space-time. But none of it will matter unless we also build a more just Earth. Katherine Johnson didn't just help us escape gravity. She taught us how to rise with grace. The equation never ends. Katherine's legacy in STEM, civil rights, and culture. STEM legacy, more than math. Katherine Johnson's legacy in STEM isn't just about calculations, it's about access. She proved that mathematical genius can be found anywhere. Complex science needs diverse minds. Innovation is incomplete without inclusion. Today, her story is integrated into university-level aerospace engineering curriculums, elementary school math challenges based on her techniques, textbooks that feature women of color in science, coding clubs that emphasize the value of logic, accuracy, and vision. NASA continues to honor her through fellowships, naming ceremonies, and inclusion programs that seek to bring more hidden figures into the light. Civil rights legacy. A quiet warrior. Though Katherine Johnson wasn't a frontline activist, her life was a civil rights act in itself. In a time when Black women were expected to remain silent, segregated bathrooms reminded her daily of inequality, and professional credit was denied based on race and gender, she chose to remain present. She chose to excel. Her legacy is now taught alongside Thurgood Marshall, Rosa Parks, and Martin Luther King Jr. as part of the long road toward justice. Because when a Black woman calculates the trajectory that takes the first American into orbit, she's not just solving for velocity, she's reshaping history. Cultural legacy, a mirror, and a beacon. The release of Hidden Figures didn't just make Katherine famous, it made her immortal in the cultural imagination. The movie grossed over $236 million globally. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Schools, libraries, and museums around the world hosted events in her name. Katherine Johnson action figures, dolls, and toys now exist, helping kids role-play brilliance. She became both mirror to those who never saw themselves and beacon to those who seek the way. Her cultural legacy is deeply tied to a simple, profound truth. You don't have to be loud to change the world. You just have to be right and stay in the room. Intersections. Science meets justice. Katherine's story sits at the intersection of STEM and education, race and gender equity, public policy and representation, history and the future. Her life proves that social justice and science are not separate, they are intertwined. Every unlocked opportunity for a young Black girl in science today is a variable in her equation. She didn't just calculate orbits, she bent the arc of possibility. The equation lives on. Today, Katherine's name adorns school buildings, scholarships, science centers, satellites, research grants, classrooms in rural and urban neighborhoods alike, but perhaps her greatest legacy is invisible, like gravity. It exists in the confidence she left behind, in the culture she reshaped, in the doors she unlocked for generations she never met. The equation never ends. It multiplies exponentially. Katherine Johnson, in her own words, wisdom, quotes, and final reflections, the voice behind the numbers. For all her mathematical prowess, Katherine Johnson also possessed a powerful voice, calm, articulate, and full of insight. She rarely sought the spotlight, but when she spoke, her words cut through noise with the same clarity as her calculations. This chapter gathers her most profound quotes, thoughts, and reflections. They offer not only a glimpse into her mind, but also a guiding compass for the generations to come. On Mathematics and Purpose, we will always have STEM with us. Some things will drop out of the public eye and go away, but there will always be science, engineering, and technology. And there will always, always be mathematics. Katherine Johnson, everything is physics and math. I tell kids that math is the basis for everything, and once you understand that, it's like having a superpower. Interview with NASA. I counted everything. I counted the steps to the road, the steps up to church, the number of dishes and silverware I washed. Anything that could be counted, I did. Reflecting on childhood curiosity, on being a black woman in science, girls are capable of doing everything men are capable of doing. Sometimes they have more imagination than men. National Visionary Leadership Project. I didn't feel the segregation at NASA because everybody there was doing research. You had a mission and you worked on it, and it was important to be right. On surviving segregation with dignity, I don't have a feeling of inferiority. Never had. I'm as good as anybody, but no better. Simple and strong self-belief. On life, work, and balance. Like what you do, and then you will do your best. Katherine Johnson's career advice. I found what I was looking for at NASA. I wanted to help people go into space. That was my job. Reflecting on her life's mission. I live off faith. I never felt alone. On resilience through faith and family. On legacy and the future. I'm just lucky. God put me at the right place at the right time. Modesty. Even after her immense contributions, I don't want to be the next anybody. I want to be the first Katherine Johnson. On owning her identity, you must understand the past to shape the future. My story is not just mine. It belongs to every child who thinks they don't belong in the room. Closing words to a high school STEM class. Final reflections. The spirit of Katherine. As we close the story of Katherine Johnson, we are not saying goodbye. We are, instead, stepping into the spaces she opened. Her numbers changed trajectories. Her voice changed minds. Her story changed culture. And her spirit, quiet, brilliant, determined will forever orbit the universe she helped us reach. Legacy is not leaving something for people. It's leaving something in people. Peter Stropel. Katherine Johnson left her legacy in us.